very hard act to follow.
Real treat this morning. Would you please join me in welcoming Mary Alice White?
It's a very hard act to follow. I'm going to start this morning by assuming that all of us here are very wise and full of historical hindsight, and I'm going to assume that we were all around in 1650 in England and had the vision to see what was going to happen. We knew the printing press had been invented, and we'd seen the Psalter and the Bible printed in vernacular languages. Being full of foresight, we saw what was coming, so we made some predictions. We predicted that the printing press would enable ordinary mortals to read the sacred scriptures in their own language, and as soon as people had access to the Holy Word, we predicted that there would be a challenge to the authority of the Church. We predicted that somebody would use the printing press to question the interpretation of the Church in Rome and would offer different interpretations of the Scripture. We predicted, in fact, the emergence of someone like Martin Luther and the Reformation, which is pretty good predicting. We also predicted that the development of a printing press and of reading materials would make people want to learn how to read so they could have access to information. This would mean, we anticipated, the development of a system for teaching reading. So we predicted that the common school would be developed well beyond where it was in 1650, which was not very far. We went on to predict that before long, all the children in England would be going to school, not just to learn to read, but to learn to count, to write, and lots of other things. So we predicted the rise of the public school, largely because of the printing press. We went on to predict that things would not stop there. We thought that if you gave people a little taste of education, they're going to want more. So we predicted the rise of universal education from an early age to adolescence, and that all children would be required to attend school at the expense of the state. This prediction was considered totally ridiculous in 1650. Finally, we predicted that with the development of the public school and the desire on the part of people for more and more information, that the level of education would rise over the next few centuries until there would be more students than farmers in an advanced society. This last prediction was so accurate that it actually did occur in this country in the 1960s, when for the first time in human history, there are more students in our society than there were farmers. This might help us to understand what happened in the 1960s. Instead of a Shays rebellion, we had a students' rebellion. As you can see, we were very bright back in 1650, and were able to predict the major impact of the printing press. We were right in assuming that it was revolutionary, that it would affect society in the broadest sense, that it would change institutions, and would cause the emergence of a new one, the public school, and the division and decline of another, which was the Church in Rome. We learned from that lesson that once people have access to information, there is no way of turning back. Access to information may be the most important political tool that people can have. For those of you who may have read Barbara Tuchman's most recent book, The March of Folly, will recognize that our predictions were not shared by a series of popes in Rome. They made some pretty dreadful mistakes in not understanding what was happening. They made 5 mistakes, which I think have some special meaning for us as educators today. 1, they did not recognize the invention of the printing press. 2, they did not see the vast implications that the printing press would have across society. 3, they did not see the impact of the printing press on their own system, that of the Church in Rome. 4, they did not plan how to meet that change to avoid the loss of power of their system. And 5, they did not develop a positive plan to maintain a leadership position. Now, I'm going to argue this morning that the schools today have some of the same concerns that the popes faced in the 16th century with the arrival of the printing press. This time the schools are faced with the development of new information technologies which are going to have, I believe, a very major impact on our society. I'm going to stick my neck out and make some predictions, having had the benefit of historical hindsight of 1650. Now I'm going to make 6 predictions about the development of the new information technologies, by which I mean not just the computer, but videotape, video disc, computer-driven videotape, and all the new things that are going to come along. I'm going to predict that these new information technologies will, prediction 1, alter the nature of the learning process. 2, provide a new learning system and a new psychology of learning. 3, will alter the content of what is learned. 4, will develop an alternative educational environment. 5, will provide a learning environment in which almost anyone will be able to learn almost anything. And 6, will provide a curriculum of individual choice in which the individual will choose what to learn, where to learn, when to learn, and how to learn. Now, if these predictions prove at all accurate, they'll bring with them some problems, obviously. I would like to look at these problems from the point of view of an educator, ignoring for a moment some of the legal and political problems that I think are going to be occurring as well. The educational problems that I see will be, 1, a lack of an articulated curriculum. I see a development of a curriculum at home and one at school, and they may or may not prove to be compatible. Problem 2, the way in which our schools are currently organized will probably become unworkable and will need to be totally reconceptualized. Our schools are organized by age, which is what a grade means, as you know, on the assumption that the material is being learned for the first time by the pupils. Our curriculum assumes that certain things are appropriate for first graders, other things for 8th graders, but it's all based on the assumption that this is the first major contact that the child has had with the material. If that assumption is wrong, as I think it might be with home learning, then we must ask, how should we organize a school in which children of the same age are going to bring with them an enormous range of different knowledge of the same school subject? Problem number 3 is going to be for the teachers, of course, who, if we keep the graded system, would be asked to teach pupils of the same age who would be in widely different tracks of competence. Some of these children would, in one grade, for example, would be on track 23, some on track 7, some on track 54, some on track 16, assuming we still use the term track. And I don't know what a teacher's supposed to do with that situation. Will the teacher become an information manager, whatever that is? The 4th problem, a major problem, is going to be that the schools no longer will control access to the skills and knowledge essential for an educated citizen and worker. This is probably the most profound change of all for the schools, because it strikes at the assumptions of the public school. What happens to schools when they no longer have a monopoly on access to learning? Well, they find themselves in an historical parallel to that of the popes, who no longer control access to the sacred scriptures. The beginning of the loss of control over access to learning started some time ago, although I don't think any of us recognized it. It began with radio, but it certainly took off with the widespread installation of television in the 1950s. I do not believe that we, as educators, ever saw television for what it was, which is not a wasteland and not just an entertainment system, but actually a second educational system. It meant that schools no longer controlled access to information. Children could turn to the television for access to certain kinds of information, and this meant that the schools had a competitor. That was only the beginning. Today, schools are in competition with all the new technologies. They are in competition with them in content, in how to teach, and how to make learning fun, and how to motivate the learner, in providing a social interaction among children that is learning-centered, which some of the new software programs do provide. And most of all, they're in competition with the notion of learning by individual choice, as opposed to learning in a group setting, at a group pace, and in a grade. We as educators, I think, failed to see television for what it was. It snuck into our living rooms as mere entertainment and is turned into an alternate informational system. The new technologies are going to turn learning into a combination of education and entertainment. Now, all of this happens at a time when schools are weathering a period of intense criticism, as you know. In my view, one set of criticisms has come from comparing television with school, and this has come from children. They have found that learning from television is fun, and by comparison, they find school boring at times. Another set of criticism has come because we are the most educated society the world has ever known. That isn't said often enough. We are the most educated society the world has ever known. No society anywhere in the history of man has been as educated as the United States society today. The more society is educated, the more likely it is, I think, to criticize its educational system. Everybody is an expert in education. After all, we all went to school, even though we can't agree on what is good education. And that's not going to go away. The more educated we become, the more likely education will be a major focus of debate, and I think that's rather healthy. But the era into which I see us going is one in which the schools are going to be facing increasing competition from alternative learning environments, and at the same time, education will still be increasing in our midst, so schools are likely to come under still more competition and more criticism. And I'm sorry to have to say that, but I think it's accurate. What then should school leadership do faced with this prospect of a rival in learning at home? Mind you, I did not say it was a rival in teaching, but I did say it was a rival in learning, and a growing one, and in a society that's highly educated. I think school leadership today might take a lesson from what happened to those popes, and it could do several things. First, school leaders need to develop a broad picture of the change that all the technologies will bring, and by all, I mean not focusing exclusively on computers. Within a year or so, maybe two, I'm reasonably sure you will be seeing computer-driven video disc and computer-driven videotape, and if you've not anticipated that change, you'll be caught with your computer terminals down. This year, there are expected to be 20 million video cassette recorders in the American homes. That's twice as many as there are computers. VCRs are going up 78% in sales this year, and computers 10%. People are being entertained and being educated by video cassettes right now, and this might suggest to educators that they should pay attention to that technology. It's a wonderful medium for modeling, and if you're interested in modeling behavior, and we educators are, I'd pay attention to it. So the first job, as I see it, is to develop a broad picture of the future of technologies, of all the technologies. Secondly, I think that unlike the popes, we as educators should realize what this change is going to mean in terms of broad social change. It certainly is going to affect the workplace as well as the home. It probably will affect commercial establishments, some of which have already installed video disc systems. It will affect what we want to learn and how we want to learn. It's going to put information into the hands of people, which I believe is going to have some broad political implications. Third, I think that we as educators have to recognize that these new technologies are going to impact on the schools. Now, I've already indicated, I think it's going to change the role of school in society. The school will no longer be the controller of the access to learning, but will be one of the doors to learning, just one. I think we need new ideas about how to organize school. If the schools do not control access to information, then they're going to be receiving pupils who have already had access to information. Fourth, we're obviously going to need a new definition of what teachers should be doing, given these changes. And if we were smart, I think we would be experimenting now with new teaching approaches, new teaching structures. Fifth, we're going to need articulation very badly between what is being learned at home and what is being learned at school. And sixth, I think schools need to develop a positive plan to survive with and by the new technologies. Let me make very clear what my values are about schools. I care very much indeed about the survival of the public school system. A democracy without a public school system is going to be in very serious trouble in my mind. I want to see the public school stay as a healthy, lively institution. In order to do so, I believe schools have got to become much more imaginative about what they do in the new learning society that is different from what they're doing now. It's not going to be enough to buy computers. It's not going to be enough to set up a computer resource room or laboratory. Computer literacy is going to fade out very quickly, I believe. In fact, computers are going to be only a small part of the picture that is coming. Here are some suggestions that I'd like to make about what we might be doing to meet the electronic learning revolution. My first suggestion is to recognize that the school market is a very small part of the software market and therefore does not have much clout. Textbook manufacturers are not terribly interested in producing a lot of software for fear they may hurt the sales of their textbooks. People who are designing software for the home are not very concerned with the school market, which represents between 10 and 30% at the most of the software market. What are schools to do? One obvious thing is that schools could be doing is to join together, to put their purchasing power together as one unit, to influence the standards of school-related software that's being designed. Parents, I think, would welcome activity on the part of schools in setting some standards for software. Parents are looking for standards. They want to know what is good software. Secondly, schools have got to make up their mind what they're going to do with the new technologies. I'm sure you've heard advocates of many points of view so far in this meeting, so I might as well advocate my own point of view. I think computer literacy does not belong in schools, if by that you mean teaching children how to use unusable machines. The computer industry should not ask the schools to do their job for them. Industry should be designing machines that are as easy to use as television, which all children from about age 4 can operate in about 15 seconds. Precious school time and resources should not be spent on teaching people how to use poorly designed tools. I also do not see much point in teaching programming languages, except for those people who want to learn them. I do not think you should have to know a programming language to use a computer as a learning tool. At the present time, and this of course may change quickly, most things do in this field, I see computers being used as a learning tool in primarily one area, and that is as a word processing tool. Computers are superb as writing tools. If I were running a school today, and I wouldn't last very long, as you can tell, that would be where I would be putting my money in my mouth. I would be encouraging parents to buy appropriate word processing hardware and software for the home. I would encourage word processing in school in every part of the curriculum I could think of. I would encourage teachers to encourage pupils to write with a computer, and I'd be spending money to get them into school. I'd make them available to parents after school. I would do anything I could, including standing my head to say, here is a useful learning tool. It's called word processing, but what it is an electronic finger that helps you to write. And if I were a superintendent, I'd be using one in my office. If I were a member of a state education agency, I'd be using one in my office there. A third suggestion is that educational leaders should be setting some consumer standards for hardware, especially for ease of use for children in the preschool area and up to grade 12. As a group, educational leaders could be making recommendations to parents about hardware as well as software, and parents are looking for guidance. Suggestion 4, educational leaders through an association should be setting up study committees on videotape, video disc, and video texts to anticipate how they'll be used at home, how they'll influence the school, and how they might be used at school. Committees should be studying networking, electronic mail, the use of databases at home and at school, etc., etc. We should be making recommendations. We should be carrying out trials. We cannot lead without information, and information has to be up to date. I'd be doing my best to anticipate what's going to happen, deciding which of the technologies, or all of them, could be used at school and or at home. And I would be making my thinking change from looking at school in a narrow way to looking at learning in a broad way. Some of the questions I would be asking is, when people can learn a wide variety of subjects at home through a combination of technologies such as computer, videotape, video test, what is the school's job going to be? Since children cannot stay home anymore, 60% of all mothers of children under 6 now work. They're going to go somewhere during the day. Presumably that somewhere is going to be school. It's a question, how is a school going to be something more than an unattractive alternative to children that have access to whiz-bang learning technologies at home? Now, I must say, I worry a lot about what could happen in the future. If certain scenarios unfold, I can imagine technology moving into homes, into libraries, into museums, because it's already moving there. I can see educational technology moving into shopping centers, into public parks, into a variety of stores. I can see educational technology moving out of the public schools in this scenario. If this happens, education will no longer be the school's major function. I worry that schools are reacting to these educational technologies as though they were just another subject to be learned, such as a computer language or computer literacy. Some schools seem to be responding to a technological revolution by incorporating it into the traditional curriculum. Larry Kremen has said that schools deal with the revolution by inventing a course in it. I worry that we educators are not asking the right questions. Too many of us are asking, how can we box this innovation into another course, another credit, another class period? And the questions I think we should be asking would be, what would learning look like if we put the power of the technologies to work for the learner? What would a group learning environment look like? And you notice I did not use the word classroom. What should learners have in common who come together to learn with these technologies? Do we need a help function as a live person in the room or a live person at the end of a communications network? How do learners progress from one level of knowledge or skill to another? What will be the learner's view of reality when the learner moves from speech to print, to hands-on experience, to simulations that represent a more abstract conception of reality? What happens when the direct experience and the simulation give conflicting perceptions of reality? How do learners deal with the broad flow of data which varies in accuracy, in relevance, and in conciseness? I think these are radical questions. Radical questions are what you ask about a revolution. If we do not ask radical questions, we will not ask the right questions. If we do not ask the right questions, we will make terrible mistake of trying to confine radical change into little boxes. The boxes, in my mind, are never going to hold it. The learning revolution will escape those little boxes. It will go out into the home, into the museums, into the libraries, and into public places, and it will leave the schools. If that happens, the public school system will become a daycare center for people who are 5 to 18 years of age, and that makes me worry. And I worry about software being developed by private sector without any participation by a public agency or its representative, who will ask, is this appropriate education or good education or desirable education, or does it link substantively with prior software or make sense in the head of an 8-year-old? I worry about who's going to afford these learning technologies and software and who's not going to be able to afford them. But yes, I am excited and thrilled when I see learning with the new technologies that is responsive to the learner's pace, that is under the learner's control, that is interactive, that is fun to use, and that is full of images. This is what learning could be like. And I get very excited and I say, what a wonderful place school could be. We're no longer the school that was invented because of the printing press. We're a school to educate citizens and workers, not just to read with the use of the technologies. People are going to have many choices they did not have before. They might learn geography in class. They might learn it on a piece of software. They might learn it on a video disc. It's very good on that. They might learn music in the classroom, but they can also learn music on a computer software. They might learn to write in school. They might use simple word processing piece of software at home. They might do a scientific experiment at school, or they might be interacting with one on video disc. But technology has a way of fooling us. I was told recently that there are 2 large groups of users for the Tandy 100 portable computer. And the first is journalists, which we would all expect. And the second largest user group likes its portability, its speed of computation, and are great admirers of the speed with which data can be dumped. And these are bookies. People are going to have choices they did not have before, and when people have choices, they're going to make comparisons. When they make comparisons, some are going to come off well, and some are not going to come off as well. So as an educator, I would have to say that the institution we call schools is going to have to change if it's going to survive in a meaningful way. It could survive in a non-meaningful way, but I don't think you and I are interested in that. For schools, and by schools here, I mean not just K through 12, I mean colleges and graduate schools and schools of education where I work, are clearly going to have to change to be an attractive alternative to what people will be able to get on their own. Why should a student come to my school of education, great though it is, at a great deal of trouble and expense, be unable to park her car, and pay what she feels is a great deal of money for a course in which she sits and listens to somebody talk? In 1984, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All of us educators have got glue in our heads about the great value of having people listen to us talk, which I'm illustrating at this very moment. What the new technologies say to me is that there are lots of different ways to learn. People can learn from hearing someone talk, yes, but they can also learn in a game format. They can learn through manipulation, through interactivity, through pictures enormously well. And they can learn by reorganizing what they see in a way that suits their particular mental style. And they can learn by repeating as often as they wish. And they can learn by getting individual help. All of this would lead me as an educator to say to myself, the school is not going to control access to learning in the future. It's probably not going to control access to information. In fact, it doesn't today. So perhaps educational leaders should be asking, what are the cognitive skills that people are going to need as they move into an age of learning through the new technologies? Should school be the place where one learns how to evaluate the quality of information? Should school be the place where we compare data from databases? Should school be the place where we learn how to organize information for memory storage and how to retrieve it? Should school be the place where we learn how to bring information together that has been stored in random order? Should school be the place where we learn to cope with an overwhelming amount of information? It may be that the really crucial skills we're going to need are the skills for learning in a world full of information technologies and an overabundance of information of varying quality. These are some of the questions I'm asking myself. It's tough going. It makes me have to rethink all my assumptions about education and schooling. I have to ask myself, which of these skills and knowledge areas can best be learned using the technologies? Which of these has to be learned face-to-face with an instructor? What can this technology do better than I can? What can I do that is better than this technology? I'm asking these questions, as I hope you are. If we don't ask these questions, and if we don't develop some way of understanding what is happening to all of us, and to our schools in particular, I think we're going to be overwhelmed by the change. The worst thing that could happen is for schools not to see beyond the hardware, the gimmicks, and the hoopla. To not see that this is a broad social change affecting all aspects of our society, but particularly the school, and to not be actively thinking about how the school should be changing itself. If we don't change intelligently, I think we'll repeat the message of the 16th century, and we'll have our own educational reformation, and maybe that's inevitable. But I would like to see our schools have the wit and the imagination and the intelligence and the courage to anticipate, to predict, and to plan. Thank you very much.